Not too far from Miami, off the South Dixie Highway in Homestead, Florida, sits a world-famous structure. It was created entirely from over 1,000 tons of sedimentary rock that features slab walls, tables, chairs, a crescent moon, a stone telescope, a water fountain, and a sundial that was quarried and sculpted from stone found nearby. It has been compared with Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Egypt in its mystery and innovation. Many sources claim that the location, originally called Rockgate Park, is scientifically inexplicable and has baffled scientists, engineers, and scholars since its inception in 1923. It has appeared countless times in books, magazines, and television shows, as well as the park being listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Musician Billy Idol even wrote a hit song about the place, Sweet 16. For decades, it would feature a perfectly balanced 9.5-ton stone gate at the entrance that, despite its weight, would easily swing open with a strong breeze or the push of a finger. As strange and amazing as the site is, its history is equally as fascinating. It was created by just one man, working alone for 28 years until his death in 1951. He was a Latvian immigrant named Edward Leedskalnin, who stood, it is said, just under 5 feet tall and weighed 100 pounds. Legend has it that he was inspired to build the structure after being abandoned by his 16-year-old sweetheart on what was to be their wedding day. Spurned by his lost love, he set out to prove to her and the world that he could do something remarkable and make something of himself despite his poverty, physical shortcomings, and 4th grade education. Today we are talking about the very thing that would make Ed remarkable, a mysterious marvel of the modern American mythology, the Coral Castle.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, ancient architecture, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We are your hosts, Woody Brown
And Tyler Bentz.
What's up, brother?
Hey, man.
Dude, I got to apologize for my nasal, man.
You got it again.
It's just these allergies has now turned into like some kind of weird sinus thing. And
Tell them about your other symptoms.
anyways, I'm super excited about our episode this week because this is like one of those things that I'm sure I've kind of heard of.
Yeah.
You know, there's all these kind of things that you kind of hear about throughout the country, the cool places that you can actually visit that have some sort of mysterious history and often kind of enveloped in some sort of paranormal, or I don't know, it's just really cool and rad. So I was excited whenever you brought this topic up. I think, although we just kind of heard a little bit about this guy, I think maybe starting out with just a little context into who he is, or is that where you want to start?
Yeah. So basically, we have a guy named Edward Leedskalnin. We'll call him Ed for, to keep it short. When he was 26 years old, still living in Latvia, he was apparently rejected by his 16-year-old fiancée, Agnes Skufst, Skuvst, which was one day before the wedding. So you have this guy who's incredibly heartbroken. He's, at the time, the dude weighs around 100 pounds, was a little under 5 foot tall, and he would kind of keep this stature and size throughout his life, even as an older man, but kind of came from poverty. So, he found his true love, and then she pretty much left him a day before the wedding. And
Ouch.
Yeah, in the research I learned that he was really, really strong-willed, pretty political as well. Like he was of the belief that, if you didn't work, you didn't get the right to vote. And if very sort of idealistic and very strong, just strong-willed basically. And so he took this as his the sort of the linchpin of, okay, well, I'm going to go do something amazing and prove to, everyone who's always looked down on me, and prove to my lost love, Agnes, that I'm going to make something of myself, And so he hops on the boat, arrives in New York City. When he got in America, he lived in Canada for a while, sort of bounced around, moved to California, moved to Texas. When he was in Texas, he was, he wasn't feeling well, and he had a doctor basically tell him that he had developed tuberculosis. So in 1918, he...
In 1980,
he's a vampire. In 1918, he was living in Florida City, I guess. So that's where he originally moved. Well, I don't know if I'm kind of burying the lead here, but so when he originally moved to Florida City is when, he started building this structure, building the castle, which he called Ed's Place. And then the official name was, he called it Rockgate Park. It actually wouldn't get the name Coral Castle until after he died, which is kind of interesting. But he was building it. He was there until 1936. And then when he was in Florida City, he had heard about like a subdivision being built sort of near the area. And so, it was kind of encroaching on his sort of deal there. And so he literally basically backed it all up, moved it close to like Homestead. It's like a little outside of Miami, like Miami-Dade County. So southern Florida.
Which sucks because the second that you brought this up, I immediately Googled how long does it take to get
Me too. I
and
did
it's
the
like,
exact same.
almost 12 hours is a little bit of it's a little too long for me to just hop in the car right now and go take a look.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah. So, he moved to Homestead, moved at, the second building. This was 1936. He built 10 acres of land. He spent the next 3 years moving the castle and like its structures, like anything that you could kind of move. I'm sure some of it stayed because it's like, once we get into it, you'll see just how sort of massive and how much of an undertaking all this would be to move.
Right.
But he moved basically 10 miles away. So
he builds this attraction. Now, from I guess he always kind of had it in mind to make it sort of like a destination, right? Like a tourist attraction.
Right.
And this kind of be his sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, his white swan, his opus that would prove to his long-lost love and his family and everything that he made something of himself. And at the end of the day, look, we're still talking about it now.
Yeah.
Almost 100 years later.
That's right.
So the part that kind of takes it to the next level in terms of a tourist attraction made of the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, have you already said what kind of stone it is?
No, it looks like oolite, but it's actually pronounced oolite limestone.
Okay.
So it's somewhat like, it's somewhat porous, still super heavy. It kind of looks like, it looks somewhat like coral as far as like it being sort of porous. And I guess why they call it the Coral Castle and it being in Florida.
Let's start talking a little bit about just like the beginnings of the mystique surrounding this.
Well, so once he moved to Homestead is when he named it Rock Gate. And he did that because of this massive gate on the property, which is over 9 tons. And it can like sort of swing open. We'll include a bunch of pictures because you really do kind of have to see it. And everything that I've looked into, it's always remarked as like, none of these pictures really do this place justice. Like you kind of have to see it in person. So we definitely got to get a trip down there because it sounds and looks amazing. But yeah, he's, this little dude and he just starts building away. One thing that I should note as well is that Ed would move, all this stuff, the 10 miles down the road. He had like an old Republic truck where he sort of laid 2 rails on, and he had a friend in the area that would let him use his tractor and sort of transport everything onto this old truck, that he would drive it and then go back and forth. There's a lot of mystery into this story just in general, but it's kind of fascinating where even his friends, they never really saw him doing any of the sort of the heavy lifting, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so even down to like that, even down to like lifting these giant pieces onto the truck. Nobody ever, they never saw him do that at all.
Yeah. I mean, and just to remind you, just to remind our audience here, we're talking about like, this is a structure or a series of structures in this little attraction that he's built that is made of, around or, a little bit over 1,000 blocks of this stone. And we're talking like hundreds of tons.
Yeah. No. We're talking a little under 1,100 tons.
Jeez Louise.
Which is a lot of tons.
Yeah. I mean, that's a ton of tons?
It is a ton of tons, yeah.
But like, the main mystery here, and you were kind of alluding to it, is like, not only did nobody really witness him sort of, transporting or building this thing, but also like no one witnessed this guy whenever he like quarried it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that was one of the things, and I think, well, let me say this before we even really get into it: this is one of those sort of cases, those sort of mysteries or urban legends or whatever, that on the one hand is kind of an anomaly, because unlike all most other urban legends or all that, it's like, oh, there was this little guy from Latvia and it's said that he built this da-da-da-da. It's like, no, we have every bit of this to see. You can see the example of all of his life's work,
right?
And so you have that, but then on the flip side of that, this is because of that situation, which I think it sort of speaks to, I don't know, in a way it kind of speaks to like just that sort of natural kind of super skeptic or debunker, is like they're so, like, everything you see about this case is like solved, debunked. We figured it out. We figured out how this 100-pound guy who's under 5 foot tall with tuberculosis, we figured out how he's moved almost 1,100 tons. And not just one time, but built it and then moved it from one location 10 miles down the road. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Come on,
Yeah.
And so it really did kind of make me think of, because we have the physical sort of quote unquote proof of what he's done, it would just be the same thing if we suddenly discovered the body of a Bigfoot or, you know what I mean? I don't know. It really like speaks to it. Like it's almost hard to find things on this, especially if you go to like YouTube or anywhere else. There's so many videos right off the bat. It's like solved, debunked, hoax. It's like, hoax? What are you talking about? So, and so back to your point, like the 1,100 tons of this rock, it was all quarried from nearby, on his property and like around the area. So we're talking about the oolite limestone, which is basically bedrock. So basically, you dig down, and then you hit the bedrock, which in this particular area I looked, it goes 14,000 feet down. So we're talking rock that is like solidly connected for 14,000 feet below. So just kind of wrapping your head around that, to me, is like really impressive. Like even put all like the building and the carving without leaving really any score marks, or like the carving shapes and crescent moons and like a telescope and a water wheel and all this like really impressive stuff. Take all that aside, just the idea of like coring it and being able to like separate that from,
well, just the time that it takes to make one of those blocks. I kind of looked into it a little bit, and even just that alone is such a
undertaking.
Such an undertaking for one person to do. So like, even though there are skeptics or I guess some folks who have seen some ways that he was able to like lift heavy stuff and everything like that, that's fine. But like, take all the sort of mystique away from it for just a second. And even still, it's crazy. I mean, like, there are all kinds of just super interesting things that he built within this thing. Like I read about like this sundial that tells time within 2 minutes of accuracy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just
Yeah, so a lot of the things, so we have the gate, which was sort of the big feature, and this thing is 9 tons. What is that in pounds? Do you know what that is?
so it's 18,000 pounds.
Yeah. So just the gate itself is 18,000 pounds, and it's this thing that up until 1986, but I'll get into that in a second. It's like perfectly balanced of like a little counterbalance on the bottom. So it's this giant stone that kind of comes to somewhat of a point at the bottom, and it acts as a gate. So, 2 people can walk through on each side, and then you turn it around, and it fills in like the full width of, like the opening, like the gate opening. And so, just that alone is kind of like a marvel in the sense of, something that massive and that, expertly built that it was said that like a strong breeze could blow it, or even, a 3 or 4 year old kid could move it with a finger.
Right.
Which is just fascinating. And so one of the things that a lot of the debunkers kind of say, and I'll be kind of going back and forth with this throughout the episode, but a lot of the things they say is, well, we've seen, there's photos of his tools, but that still doesn't account for the fact that, again, yes, we see pulleys, we see like all these kind of tools and all that, but at the same time, he didn't have any electrical tools. The most sort of high-tech piece of equipment he had was when his friend would let him borrow his tractor, and that wasn't even for any sort of excavation. That was just basically to move things around, and mainly that was used in the beginning, when he was moving it from the one location to the second location. Mm-hmm. A lot of the debunkers are also going to say, well, he worked in lumber camps when he was still in Latvia, and he came from a family of stonemasons. So obviously he had the knowledge and knew how to do it, but it still doesn't make up for the fact of one little child-sized man being able to do, move and manipulate 1,100 tons of bedrock.
Yeah. I mean, again, I kind of saw some of that stuff too in terms of like, oh, this part solved. And it's like, even if everywhere. There's like a single part, it still leaves so much. Like, could the guy have been like an engineering genius who was an expert in physics that knew how to counterbalance certain things so that all that could happen? I mean, maybe, but also, how did he quarry all that rock and then win? And by the way, this is a guy who, up until I think he died, would actually physically be there every day, greeting visitors, like handing out pamphlets and it's just really, really cool. Yeah,
he was a guy that had a really great pride in doing this. And I mean, you kind of think it's a pretty tragic story, if this all true. There are some folks that say that some of the stuff with his 16-year-old love doesn't quite add up, and there wasn't, he didn't have a lost love, and that the whole term Sweet 16, which, by the way, Clay, if you're listening, here's your synchronicity for your wonderful kiddo just turning 16.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
But he called it like his Sweet 16, and apparently that was, a lot of folks think that was more of like a code. Or sort of like his ideals. It's kind of blurry a little bit, but there's a lot of folks that say that there's sort of a interchangeability between this story of his lost love and then it being like the actual girl, and then it being like this sort of coded kind of thing. Like he was sort of known for writing and printing up these pamphlets, like you mentioned. Yeah. He had one that was called A Book in Every Home, which were, basically his thoughts on the Sweet 16 kind of deal, domestic and political views. And then
I read a hilarious quote from that one.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
He basically, this is just amazing. And it's just kind of, it's a sign of the times, really.
Oh, yeah.
Of what would be considered crazy back then or intense. So he says in that pamphlet, A Book in Every Home, he says, quote, "The schools and the churches are cheapening the girls. They are arranging picnics. They're coupling up the girls with the fresh boys, and then they send them out to the woods, parks, beaches, and other places so that they can practice in first-degree lovemaking.
Yeah.
And by the way, if I was going to major... Well, never... Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It was definitely a sign of the times, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also that coupled with, him being from Latvia, and I'm sure like maybe the English, there was a little bit of...
There might be some lost in translation.
A little
type
bit
stuff.
lost in translation.
And I mean, Latvia, honestly, too, it's kind of close to in the news these days because of where it's located in Eastern Europe. So hopefully everybody there, if you're listening from Latvia, I hope you're safe.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of a great place for us to kind of go into some of the theories on how, or what people think about, like how he was able to do it all.
So
can I dive
get
in a little bit?
Get in there.
Because here's the thing, all right? You got to go back in time. You've got this, like, okay, this guy moved down to Florida. Now, this is before ever the snowbirds were, flocking to Florida. You got a guy, he's an immigrant. He moves down to Florida. He moves into this neighborhood. Apparently, he's single. And he just keeps to himself a little bit. And he's just tinkering away.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this humongous structure, people are going to be like, now, this dude is weird.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm sure that the theories about what was going on over there were just sky high. Mm-hmm. But some of the stuff that I read about was actually, it's actually pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And so
after these messages, we'll be right back.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right, so here are some of the theories. First, and now this one I thought just out of the gate is one of my favorites. Some of the curious sort of neighbors, again, they're not really trusting this guy. They're like, I wonder what's going on. Hey, I wonder what's going on, Woody. Mm-hmm. They go over there late at night and they reportedly witness him placing both palms on a block of stone.
Yeah.
And then he started to sing.
Yeah.
And another report said that when he started to sing, the rock started levitating and he pushed it, he just like kind of moved it over with ease.
Yeah, it's also said that some people would claim to hear like a humming sound. Other people would also claim around that time, some of the locals, they would also claim to hear what sounded like incantations, they would say, in what sounded to be Latin. So there's a lot of sort of, this is kind of where the mystery comes.
Yeah. This is when it starts to begin to, people start to fill in the gaps, right? We can't figure out how it was done. Mm-hmm. And so this is the beginning of the part that I'm like, oh yeah, now we're talking.
Mm-hmm. And also, like I said before, when his buddy would come over with the truck and the trailer or whatever, he would always kind of find something to have, his buddy or anybody that would come to kind of help. He would always have them go do something else. Mm-hmm. And then they would show back up and it's like, wait a second. There's this 5-ton, giant boulder on the truck. Like, what just happened here?
There was some story that I read where he had somebody that showed up with a tractor, and he's like, "Hey man, just pull it around over there." And the guy's like, "Okay, well I don't." And he's like, "Just pull it around." And he goes to where he's supposed to pick it up, and this dude's already moved a ton of the rock that wasn't there before. Like he already, I think the guy that was bringing the tractor already went to where he was supposed to go or something, and then like came and talked to Ed and was like, "Hey Ed, man, all that stuff needs to be moved. Do you want me to?" He's like, no, I got it. And by the time the tractor went to the other side, it was already like done.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the other theories that folks had about it was that he may have some sort of, hidden telekinetic powers. Mm-hmm. And again, folks, I get it, right? Especially if you're somebody that really kind of believes that, there's probably some sort of engineering, scientific explanation for this.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. It's also cool. It's also like an incredible testament to like this dude's patience and work ethic.
Oh, 100%.
Even if it was just like simple
Right.
pulleys and physics,
Yeah.
because physics really is like an interesting science and it's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's magic.
But
also.
like, that's not what this podcast is about. All right. This isn't the podcast you pop in after you take your Physics 101 lecture just to hear a little more, right? This is, we're going to explore all the rad theories about potentially something simple. But maybe he's like Professor X and he can move these blocks with his mind. And that's pretty freaking awesome.
Well, he was also about as tall as Professor X when Professor X was in his wheelchair.
Right.
Yeah. The thing too is like people would report seeing, the move of like these giant carvings moving along like the South Dixie Highway or whatever, but they would never see anything, being moved in the place. So every bit of work that he would do was always done at night by lantern light. He just had to have, this privacy, which is also really sort of interesting. It also is said, which I thought this was really cool, that he would he built several lookouts like along the castle walls. So like a little place where he could, if he heard somebody around, he was able to like run up like a couple like little stones in the wall so that he could look over, or like little holes where he could look inside.
Now help me out real quick. Does this guy live here too? Does he live like on the grounds, or is it just kind of like...
No. I think he does. I don't know if it ever says, but I mean, it's definitely his properties.
Okay, so maybe he does live on the property?
I think so. I think that's fair. So in 1940 is when Ed would finish putting up all the walls around the place. The walls, it is said, weigh 125 pounds per cubic foot. Each section of wall is 8 feet tall, 4 foot wide, 3 feet thick, and weighs more than 5.8 tons.
Dang.
I love, this is like one of the coolest things. So when questioned on how he would move, the giant blocks, he had two answers. He would reply that he understood the weight or the laws of weight and leverage. Or he would also say, I understand how they built the pyramids, which is something that's super fascinating. And I kind of do think that this, if I'm being honest with everybody, I think that I kind of believe that it probably is the same thing. Like, however they're doing this. I mean, you look at the pyramids and they're the most like, such laser precision, and like things are placed perfectly. And it's like, for so long, it's like the whole, there were just millions of slaves. And it's like, yeah, okay. But also, how are they doing this with like such a precision that even modern laser precision is still not up to the same level of...
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the pyramids because that's the first thing I kind of thought of too once I started reading more about this guy and the castle itself. Because sometimes you think, there's something weird on the side of the road, attraction or whatever. But once you start figuring out like, oh no, it was made by one guy.
Yeah, right.
Then the first thing I thought of was like, oh man, engineering marvels like the pyramids.
Right.
And I did read that.
Stonehenge.
There's like a quote that when asked about it, where he would say, quote, I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons.
Yeah.
Now, even if that is the only truth here, still amazing. He found it out because, like you said, man, dude, if we let's get into those in just a minute. But like, there are some insane theories about the pyramids. But before we do that, dude, I wanted to. I don't know if I'm sure you did, but one of the other really cool theories about how he was able to do this involves like these energy fields.
Yeah. Are you talking about like the ley line?
Kind of, yeah. So it's like the telluric energy.
Telluric energy, yeah.
So like, apparently whenever you go and visit, some of the folks that have gone have kind of complained about like weird headaches or just kind of feeling like weird once they are kind of standing close to or within the archway of that gate. They've had some folks kind of come out there and try to make sense of it and stuff. And some of the data that they've kind of gathered in these investigations and stuff have led to, some conclusions at least. At key points in the site, this telluric energy apparently kind of fluctuates. Now, if you're like me, I had no idea what the heck telluric energy or anything was, and so I had to look it up. And I'm not the biggest fan of Wikipedia, so I didn't use Wikipedia.
Yeah,
I actually found a Encyclopedia Britannica that talked about it. So telluric current is also called earth current, and it's a natural electric current flowing on and beneath the surface of the earth, and generally follows a direction parallel to the earth's surface, all right? Telluric currents arise from charges moving to attain equilibrium between regions of differing electric potentials. Now we're starting to get real scientific, but basically there's a lot of things in biology and chemistry and everything. Essentially, in biology and chemistry and even physics, everything is trying to move toward equal, right? And even math is like this. For all of you algebra lovers out there, you can't have more on one side of the equal sign. Everything has to be the same on both sides, and that's how you solve an equation and all that. Well, naturally, the Earth and phenomenon in Earth, they're always trying to move towards that equilibrium. So I just say that to say that these currents, if they move at all, it's because one side or another side is sort of out of balance, okay? So we won't dive too far into the geophysics of where they come from and all of that, but essentially they're often used by geophysics to map subsurface structures such as sedimentary basins, layered rocks and faults and that kind of thing.
Right.
So basically what people are trying to say potentially is that maybe Ed designed and constructed this whole site specifically above this convergence of an energy sort of ley line.
Exactly.
Where they kind of intersect, and he maybe knew that the effects of this intersection could form some sort of anti-gravity, using essentially the natural magnetism of the earth to help with his work.
Well, and what's fascinating with that is if you really get into ley lines and I mean, I get it. A lot of it is sort of converge into sort of new agey-ness, but a lot of these sort of ley lines are, the pyramids would land on it.
We're talking about the Giza pyramids, right, in Egypt?
Yeah, the Giza pyramids, but then also like the Puma Punku, or I think I'm saying that right. But all these other mounds and sort of religious sites around the world, they kind of follow along the same line, which is or lines. They're sort of intersecting lines, like the old school sort of globe you would see, where like the 80s style, where it has like the grid around it. It's like, imagine them like that. And then there's also some thought where they believe that these converging points could be where these, the quote unquote window areas, the John Keel sort of window areas where, maybe the veil's a little thinner. Maybe that's where you see cryptids.
Wow. So there might be some sort of correlation there.
Right. Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah,
dude.
it's really interesting. And also what's cool is talking about like the telluric energy and like those lines is from this point, this particular line would travel down through like Bimini Row, which is the Bermuda Triangle, which is kind of interesting, So, they say that he basically, it's proposed that he possibly could have been using reverse magnetism to do this. And so if he's using some sort of tool or some sort of method of kind of flipping that, then maybe that's the same thing that's in the Bermuda Triangle that's pulling these planes down.
Man.
If you're looking at it, magnetically.
Sure.
It's pretty fascinating, though.
Yeah, I mean, no, dude, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, it all kind of got me thinking about all of the pyramid theories, and there's some, I feel like we're going to have to at some point do an episode on them, but I at least want to kind of the main sort of I would say widely accepted non-fringe, I guess, are the ramp theory and the water shaft theory. In short, they're saying that like with those millions of slaves and stuff, that they were able to essentially use a ramp and some.
I know what you're talking
what am
about.
I thinking of? And they basically pulling these pieces up this ramp to get to the top and that kind of thing. There's also like a water shaft theory where they use the water to transport the stones and stuff and yada, yada, yada. That's fine. And, you look into those kind of things and it makes sense, but they're less interesting to me. What's really interesting to me, though, and especially because you were talking about those ley lines being over there, and I really want to kind of dive into that and the correlation of like where those things happen, as well as, potential portals or thinness in the veil, is one of the theories about the pyramids is that they're actually gigantic, ancient power plants.
Yeah, they're almost like a battery, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like you were saying, I guess it wouldn't be a sundial, but like, from the pyramids, not all of them, but like, it's kind of one of those things where all the stars line up and, so they definitely had some sort of knowledge of aligning with stars and the night sky and that whole, constellations and stuff. And he had this too. He has, apparently on the property, he has two, they're called like the two monoliths, and they're 25 feet tall, and the largest one weighs 30 tons. And it's basically just standing up straight. And it's kind of one of those things where like it can be aligned, like there's a circle in the middle, similar to like the Georgia Guidestones, where on like the equinox or whatever, it perfectly aligns with like your constellations and stuff.
Man.
Which is really, it's always been really interesting to me too.
I mean, the dude just had such a knowledge for, physics, no matter what.
Yeah.
Potential ancient, I guess, abilities to be able to do things like this. And then also astronomy.
Yeah. One thing also that somewhat is kind of sort of related to like the debunking is apparently he had built an AC current generator, which you can actually still see today. And they say that, this explains it. It's like, okay, even that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, it's impressive and it's fascinating, especially for a guy who, like I said before, he only had a 4th grade education. But, there's no records or witnesses that ever saw, that ever saw him putting any of this to use,
And doing all this stuff by lantern light, can you imagine trying to build a monolith that weighs that much? Just,
yeah,
by the lantern light.
Yeah, it's just so impressive.
For sure. Here's a couple, like, here are two other things that I thought were like kind of interesting that made me kind of think like, again, this is more like supportive of sort of like maybe he got his knowledge from someone else, meaning not of this earth. So maybe potential a different dimension or an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
He basically at some point claimed to have had a dream of being like somewhere in the Southwest U.S. and having these sky people land in a UFO. And then years later, when he was actually like visiting the Southwest, he said he saw the same sort of images that he'd seen in his dream. And apparently his grandfather, who had traveled extensively in Honduras and Tahiti, had also given Ed a book about the Mayans and their relation to the ancient astronaut theory. So I wonder he had some interest there.
I wonder if that ties into, or that's where you got some of the information about like the ley lines and telluric currents and stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. To add to that, when he landed in New York, when he first immigrated here, it's said that around that time, which it does add up, that Nikola Tesla had an apartment in New York at the time. And it's said, and there's witness testimony, that he actually met with him right when he arrived in New York. And so to me, that is just so fascinating. And it's so cool to think of like, Nikola Tesla was a genius. He was absolutely brilliant. He clearly had his finger on the pulse of, no pun intended, but the pulse of these sort of alternative means of energy and, propulsion. And so I believe that he him and Ed were probably right on the same page with a lot of this stuff.
Like, think about it this way. How does one get a face-to-face appointment with
Nikola Tesla?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, now I'm starting to lean towards like, maybe there's some sort of like, here we go.
Well,
society.
Oh, now you're talking.
That there was like, and so in other words, like
a
you don't
ninja
just
type
arrive
thing?
in New York and you're like, I don't know, I think I'll call on old Tesla today and knock on his door, see what he's up to. This is a complete stranger.
Yeah.
Right? So like, how does he track him down? How does he figure that out? Well, if they were part of the same sort of like quote unquote fraternity or something like that.
Man, that's cool.
Boom.
No, wait.
They met at like the fraternity meeting in New York.
Or he was sort of grandfathered in, no pun intended, by his grandfather who knew all this stuff, had all this information. So maybe that's how Ed was brought in. It's pretty fascinating. Man. One thing that was cool too, and I cannot remember I think this was when he was at the first location and he decided to move. It was said that, he was asked, well, where are you going to move? Like, where are you thinking about moving and stuff? And he said, the earth will tell me. And so this idea of sort of following this like ley line and, I don't know enough about it to sort of come up with an idea, but at least visually, mentally, I just picture some sort of kind of how dowsing works.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to add. Dude, I'm so glad you remembered the word because I was thinking in my head, man, what's that called?
How you find water?
Hi, man.
But I don't know if it's how you would do it, but I picture him. Oh, well, and he didn't have a car either. He would ride his bike to in town to get groceries or whatever, which was like almost 4 miles. So I just picture this dude on his bike, with like a dowsing rod holding it and just being like, oh, this is the place.
Yeah. And just in case, again, listener, if you're not super familiar with like what dowsing is, it's essentially where, it's like you use this like special rod or whatever to locate water, but sometimes it's also used for like treasure, oil, or whatever. There's people that are almost physically sensitive to these, I guess currents or whatever you want to call them from within like the earth, whether it's magnetic or telluric or whatever, that end up being these dowsers or whatever. There are, of course, some throughout history that are like charlatans or whatever that are just like, yeah, hey man, I can find that for you. Let me just, you got to pay me, well, the cost is $150.
Yeah.
You just got to pay me $75 now. And then they would just disappear.
Well, now yes, definitely, for sure, there was that. But so my dad was able to do it, which at the time I wasn't impressed as a young kid as much as I, would be now. But I think that water, magnetism, telluric currents, I think a lot of this stuff is probably all tied together. One of the things too that was said about, how he possibly could have done it was something about like, it's kind of like hard to find, but I can't really like, I don't know enough about it to go, but it was something about like sort of lunar manipulation and something tied in with like his well. And again, it's funny that we're talking about dowsers and water witches and all that kind of thing, because it kind of ties into that sort of like the Farmer's Almanac and like, like folk magic or granny magic or that kind of thing. Because, basically throughout the month, the moon is sort of the arbiter or the master of the magnetism. And so that's that's a very intense way of saying it. But that it's, it would affect like the way metals and water, rise and lower, I guess.
Yeah, it affects the tides directly.
Yeah, like the tides and stuff. So something about this pool that he had or this well is there was something about like the way the water would rise, at a certain portion of the month. And it was, I don't know, it was tied into like some other stuff. And I think he even said something about like magnetism and the moon. I found that kind of interesting too. Like, I mean, if you are looking at, like we said before, he wrote all these pamphlets, and one of the pamphlets was literally, titled Magnetic Current. So he was clearly into this idea of like magnetics and, people saying that he used reverse magnetism to move things. Well, magnetism is directly tied to the moon. So that
Maybe there's like a certain time of the...
Yeah, and he only worked at night too. So like, I don't know. To me, I don't know how that.
I mean, it's hard for me, as cool as it all is, and to be, and I'm open to it all. It's also, if I'm going to put like my skeptic hat on for a second, I mean, how much magnetism does does limestone have? I don't know.
Yeah.
I really love the ideas about like using sound.
See that
as a mean, like different frequencies.
Yeah.
Can do some really remarkable things. There's some cool like physical reactions that I forget what it's called, man. You would know this. The not sublingual, but
like subsonic frequencies?
Subsonic frequencies and stuff that we can't hear, but that still can have physical reaction.
Oh, yeah.
To stuff. And I mean, God, have you seen those videos where people will play a song or like a series of notes or whatever, and whatever the material is on top of the surface of this like speaker, essentially, it will move and do all these like weird things, and they can make it into different shapes and stuff. I mean, it is insane.
Yeah, that's called cymatics, and it's fascinating. And so if whatever he was doing, maybe he was somehow using this AC current generator, maybe that was... So I always thought that before we discussed like getting into the story and having an episode on it, I had always sort of thought that it was sort of a sound-based thing, like less about magnetism and all that. But I mean, maybe they're tied together. But I always did assume that there was something with sound. And it is interesting because in his belongings after he passed away, there was a...
French horn.
No, but there was a large tuning fork. He wasn't known to play any instruments, but it is interesting that he has a tuning fork. We have these urban legends of the kids hearing like humming sounds or chanting or incantations being sang or repeated in Latin. Yeah, it could be a lot of stuff. Like, it really could. I mean, you even think of like the pyramids, and it's like they're always holding like the ankh, which is like, is that a tuning fork? And it's just different looking than the ones that we would use,
Yeah. It's always bizarre to me, man, whenever I think about things like the pyramids or even stuff like this, like when there are these like incredible feats of science in a time when everything else is so primitive, it's just, man, it's just so hard for me to like wrap my mind around sometimes. So I'm like, it makes it harder to really just kind of accept that there was no sort of outside influence. It's like you can build these insane pyramids, but you're still using like a handheld horsetail fan. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
right.
to cool yourself. Well, I don't know. It's just wild, man.
Yeah, it's
like that pre-electricity engineering is just baffling.
Well, and again, that was Tesla's whole thing. It was this idea of like this, energy or that was sort of available to everyone, and big oil came along and automobiles came along, and it kind of squashed all that stuff. So it's almost like that era and that time that you're talking about. It's like everybody had much more sort of open minds, but then it was like, oh, no, everything has to be this. It has to be done through batteries. It has to be done with gasoline and fossil fuels, and this is the only way that you can do things. And I feel like a lot of those sort of alternative and, you would be looked at as like a crazy conspiracy theorist, but all those things were kind of left behind a little bit, I feel,
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was talking about at the top is like, the original namesake, the Rock Gate Park, was sort of based on the feature of that giant, 9.5 ton gate that would turn with a push of a finger. Apparently, and this is one of the things that sort of leads the debunkers, but, it was this thing that was perfectly balanced, on this axis, and it lasted, for decades. Apparently, it stopped working in 1986. And the only way that they were able to remove it was with 6 men and a 50 short ton crane.
Jeez.
Yeah, once the gate was removed, the engineers were able to see that he basically had drilled a hole from the top of the bottom of the stone, which to me that continues to be impressive. He had like a metal shaft inserted through the middle of this thing. The rock was resting on, or the gate was resting on an old truck bearing, and that bearing, that old truck bearing had rusted and was wearing out, and that's why, So it's funny and it's interesting to me that the one thing that stopped this, modern marvel from moving was the one piece of modern machinery.
Yeah.
That rusted and wore out,
Jeez, man.
Yeah. They put it back into place at the end of the year in 1986, and it lasted until 2005, and it sort of stopped moving again, and it was repaired, but it never rotated with the same perfect precision as it did when he built it.
Man, it's freaking awesome.
Interesting, yeah.
And so, I mean, I guess he passed away, never married, never had kids, and You know, aside from just the tragedy that a brilliant mind potentially passed away, also with him went the secret.
Yeah, I believe so. As tragic as it was, it really sort of, if that is the truth, which I kind of believe, I like to believe that it was. It's almost like he sort of traded one love for the other love, and that lifetime, love of his life was the Coral Castle. Apparently in 1958, Ed became ill. He put a sign on the door saying, "Going to the hospital." He took a bus to Jackson Memorial in Miami and died 3 days later in his sleep at the age of 64.
Damn.
Yeah. It would later go on to his nephew who lived in Michigan. He ended up selling it before he died in 1953 to a family from Illinois. During the switch in the ownership, a box of Ed's personal effects were found, it says, containing a set of instructions that led to the discovery of 35 $100 bills, which was his life savings.
Man.
And he basically made every bit of that by asking, if you didn't have any money, you didn't have to pay anything to see the castle. But if you did, he would ask a donation of 25 cents all the way up until when he died.
Jeez, man.
And so his lifetime...
What a cool thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's kind of sad now that, because now I think it's $18 per person to get in and see it, which, I mean, it is what it is. But
yeah, because I'm sure they have to kind of, they have...
like upkeep.
Work there and stuff,
and
I guess.
All that, yeah.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that's really cool, I think, is, around like the 40s and the 50s, it really kind of became... just another piece on, the Great American Road Trip, which was sort of developed, when automobiles and Route 66 and all that. And that's the stuff that I love that. There's such a romanticized, like, American idea of let's get the family up and let's go see all, the biggest ball of twine. And, like the Coral Castle sits with Gatorland in Florida, which is in Kissimmee, Florida. The Mermaids of Weeki Wachee, which... that's another one that's been around since 1947, where these mermaids kind of like come, they're able to breathe through these tubes, and then they hold their breath and they come down, and you've seen it, But I just love that. There's like the world's largest alligator, which is called Swampy. There's a monkey jungle. There's Dinosaur World, and so it's kind of that Neil Gaiman American Gods, if you've read it. It's that like roadside attraction, that kind of disappears because people just stop caring about it,
Yeah.
now that they have their phones in front of them. But
it's really cool.
This is a really cool place. It's amazing.
What's interesting is it kind of in a way, especially like if we think maybe either he was part of some secret society or potentially had some sort of knowledge from a different time or place, kind of goes into something that I'm going to talk about in a couple weeks. I'm super excited. And I'm keeping it a secret from you because I just want to,
Okay.
I think you're going to like it.
I love it. So that's the story of Edward Leedskalnin, the builder of his lifetime love, Coral Castle.
That's awesome, man.
Pretty awesome.
I love it.
So we just spent about an hour telling you that we have no idea how he did this.
Yeah, right. But hey, man, we like these unsolved
Oh, yeah, dude.
rad mysteries.
Yeah.
No, I love it, man. I love it. And you know, hey, it makes me want to head down there and also kind of discover some of these kind of things in our own area. We've got some that we'll talk about too sometime, and we'll kind of take this show on the road. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one that
Not now.
Okay.
No,
Well,
we'll
we'll save it.
I gotta go, pal. Yeah, what I was gonna say is, you know, I'm super interested in hearing listeners what your kind of take is on it. But not only this, but also, you know, the theories about the pyramids, if you want to dive in that direction. But especially like if you truly are somebody that is super skeptical about this kind of stuff, and if even just bringing up the pyramids makes you cringe, hey man, I'm also equally interested in hearing your take on true, like the scientific view of it all. You know, like I love that kind of stuff. I'm equally interested in that. So if you have a broader knowledge than I do or that Tyler does, you know, gosh, don't be afraid to reach out. This isn't us trying to get in an argument with you. I want to hear about it. You know, so some of the best places to do that would be where, Tyler?
Well, the best place to do that would be Instagram. Leave us a comment. If you have something a little more in depth that you want to talk about, shoot us a DM or hit us up at thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Feel free to send us voice memos, essays, long form stories of urban legends in your area, whatever. We love it. We love it all. Also, be sure, I know Spotify now, you can do it. Go leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple or really any podcatcher. We had a really cool review recently, and it just makes our day.
Yeah, it really does. Well, and especially whenever they, like, a 5-star review is awesome, and those stacking up just make our day as well. But when someone also takes the extra time to kind of, like, talk about why they love the show, dude, it's amazing. And, guys, I know I kind of teased this last episode, but we do have some extremely huge things coming up for the podcast. It's going to make all of this a lot easier, and then just some exciting stuff. So stay tuned. We'll tell you about it shortly, but we just want to make sure everything's good to go before we do.
Well, I guess that about does it. So we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers. now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes. The way it goes. The way it goes. The way it
Can you imagine trying to build a monolith? Is it or basilisk? What did you say?
Monolith.
A monolith. A monolith.
Hey, side note.
Okay.
I got these new. This is going to be taken out too. I got these new underwear
We'll see. So,
that I am singing their praises.
dude, I mean, next you're gonna tell me that you got some new like orthopedic
No.
shoes. Is this like getting? This is getting. First, it was like I got these new house slippers.
No,
Now, literally, it's.
I'm like, it takes a minute to get used to just the two Velcro straps instead of the tie, or the string. No, I'm being dead serious. They're like the most amazing. So I've been like for the last several years, I've like gone back and forth. So we used to have like super skinny jeans, and it was always like underwear. And then like I would sleep in boxers because like nobody wants to sleep in underwear because it's uncomfortable. And then
Incomfortable.
is it very uncomfortable? And I learned that from my chemistry teacher. And
Go ahead.
and none of this is going to be like on air anyway, right?
I mean, okay.
No, I don't want to be talking about underwear because it gets a little intimate here.
Well, I don't want to hear intimate details,
Well,
man.
just-
you
you
got a
got
new
me-
pair of underwear. Cool.
No,
I'm excited for you, dude.
Dude,
for
they're
real.
amazing.
Very excited.
So-
hey, man, excited for you.
I've gone back and forth. I don't like. I like boxer briefs, but they're just like uncomfortable. Everything's all bunched up.
How is this story still
I
going?
randomly was talking about this with somebody like Johnny, or I guess it would have had to be Johnny. And next thing I know, I hop on Instagram, and Big Brother supplies, as he always does, this random ad for these boxer briefs called Separatech. And it sounds like super bizarre, but like,
I know what this is. This is where it separates the elephant trunk
Yeah.
from the tusks.
dude, it's amazing. It literally doesn't feel like you have anything on.
Okay. Okay, dude, let's get rolling, man.
And then the sheath comes over.
Hey, man, that is really cool. Man, I'm telling you.
Dude, I'm
I was
dead
on Instagram, and
serious.
these orthopedic shoes are just to die for. They, I can walk around everywhere, and my back stops hurting.
I can walk so many
My
laps.
knees, it's like I'm a teenager again. I can walk so many laps around the mall. It's incredible.
Dude, we
Okay,
really
dude.
are going to have, we're going to be having these conversations in like 5 years.
Wait, but dude, you're saying we're gonna have like we're already.
No, I'm
This is
talking
literally
about,
how our conversations go. With you, always you're like, hey man, oh man, I found this incredible new back pillow.
I have never
Hey
said
man, I
back
got a
pillow.
perfect like. Hey man, do you ever suffer from hemorrhoids? Because I got this.
Do not have hemorrhoids.
Yeah, so get serious, Tal.
You just said you wanted to put all the jokes and shit
I just
up
want you to
top.
be perfect. All I want you to do is be professional.
You just said you wanted
Okay,
to put
show
all the
up.
jokes up top.
Yeah, but I changed my mind because you said not to.
you didn't tell me you changed your mind. You're stupid. So stupid.
Just be professional, man. Stop being so nervous.
What?
Boy, that's a great start already.
I wasn't even started. I'm getting my bearings. Hold on. Gotta get the
Professional.
squeaks out. Okay.
Go ahead.
Did you? Well, I did it like 3
Well,
times in a row there for a little bit.
That's fine, man. Just
not too far from Miami, off the South Dixie Highway.
Okay. Damn.
Dude, this
You're getting
is
sexy with it, bro.
God, this is gonna take.
Not too far off Miami's highway.
It did not sound that way. Oh man, dude, you got to learn how to talk like the dude from like the Oak Island guy.
Dude, I swear.
He's like,
dude, I've watched.
did they find a golden paddle? It's
The answer is no. They never found anything, but they said they did so that you'd watch, but then at the very end, they never found
no way, dude.
anything.
This season's the season.
Dude, that's what this is.
This
like
is the
Smallville,
one
dude.
that they're gonna find it. A crescent moon, a stone telescope, a water fountain, and
Exciting.
dude.
Let's do some science real quick. You ready?
Here we go. Okay.
Dude, the best is like, let's do some science. You're like, here we go. Jesus.